welcome. Hi, Charlie. I am so excited to have you here and to ask you all of the questions that Book Huddle Club had about your amazing book, Still the Sun. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh my gosh, I'm excited too. We were chatting before I hit record, but I'm just going to say it again because I feel like I need to speak on behalf of all of the members of Book Huddle Club. But you are such a phenomenal writer. This
Thank
book was
you.
so unique and so beautiful at the same time. It just really felt unlike anything I'd ever read before. So
Thank
well
you so
done.
much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Let's just go back and talk about before Still the Sun for a minute and the process that got you to make this phenomenal book. So I want to know, was there a specific aha moment or an experience that you had that sparked the initial idea for Still the Sun? And if there is, I would love to have a picture of kind of where you were and what like idea specifically kickstarted the story.
Yeah, no, I do absolutely have one. So this is one of two books I've ever written that was inspired by a dream. And so I had this dream, and I had this dream years ago, and it really stuck with me. So I wrote it down. And there's this dream where, in dreams sometimes it's you, and sometimes you're just watching the character. So it was Pell, and she was in this tower trying to fix these machines. And it was really important that she fix these machines, and she couldn't remember why. And then there were these two guys who were like identical, like with this long white hair and these black robes. They were watching her. And I remember they're going to another room and there's another broken machine. It's so important that we fix the machines. And in the dream, I realized that one of the guys had broken the machine. And it's like, why did you do this? And he says, because they took you away from me. And that was the dream.
Are you serious?
That scene is based off of the dream. Exactly.
Oh my gosh. Well, side note, I'm really envious that your dreams are like that and they're like fun fantasy adventures because I either have horrific nightmares or I have no dream whatsoever. That's what's going on over here. But wow, that's so amazing. Because they took you away from me, that like as the end of chapter 12, I believe.
Oh, you know better
Is
than
that
I did. I couldn't tell you which
I
chapter it
loved
was.
it. That line gave me full body chills, and it's so cool to know that came from a
Thank
dream.
you.
That's like
Yes.
surreal.
It had to be.
Wow.
It's like one of the first things I wrote down. Like it had to be in the book. And don't worry about my dreams. Last night I had a dream I was vacuuming a million cobwebs out of a room, so they're not always exciting.
They don't all become phenomenal books.
Yeah, no.
So the world of Still the Sun is so rich, immersive, and vivid, particularly in its setting. But we've also got some dreamlike mythology and elements like the War of the Gods and the walled off city. So, could you share some more about the specific inspirations or research that you put into this world?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot about the world itself is based off of Capitol Reef. I don't know if you've ever been to Utah. We have 5 national parks. And me and my family started getting really into them about 5 years ago. And Capitol Reef is my favorite one. And so even now, whenever I think about a desert, I always think about a Sahara style desert, which is actually kind of what's on the cover too. But it's much more of this like dry red rock type of desert. We have like arches and rock formations and slot canyons and all that stuff. And so that inspired that. With creation lore with the gods and like the well of creation and how the gods came to be, I actually came up with that for a completely different book that doesn't have a title. I can't even refer to it. And so when I came to this book and I thought, okay, where the gods came from, I just stole it and put it in here. And I stole the world serpent too, actually. The second book I ever finished, I think I was a senior in college. It's called Circus Solaris. It's a terrible book. But one of the things in there was this giant worm that lived inside a planet that fed via photosynthesis on these flowers. And so I've always liked that. And so I took that and I stole that for this book too to make it all work. Because the big issue with this book, like I told you about the dream, was, well, what do the machines do? Because whatever the machines do is what the story is going to be. And I came back to this idea 3 or 4 times, always thinking, okay, what could the machines do? What could the machines do? And I could never think of what the machines did until I finally stole that little bit and then it all started coming together.
That's so cool. I love that. Do you find that your ideas from maybe potential books that are brewing in your mind, do they sometimes help you? Do you take those little nuggets and help them fuel your story, or is this like the first time that's ever happened?
No, I'm sure it's happened before. There are sometimes there's ideas where I don't want to take it because I think, oh, that book might happen, or I don't want to hurt that story, and so I won't take a nugget. But I definitely borrow. I come up with all kinds of book ideas sometimes that never see the light of day, and then they just get harvested for body parts.
So cool. So cool.
Thanks.
So let's talk about Pell's character coming to life. And now that we know that Pell began in a dream, that like I don't know, adds an extra like layer of just coolness altogether. Did Pell change much as you wrote and developed the characters, or was she pretty formed from the start for you?
She was pretty formed from the start. I think most of my characters are in that when I outline a book, I have my characters like, okay, you're gonna have A, B, and C characteristics, but when I write the book, I discover D, E, and F. I always discover more about their character when I'm actually writing, and so that definitely happened with Pell as well. But Pell was interesting because Still the Sun's my 23rd published book. And by the time you get into the 20s, like for me, I started worrying that I was going to have protagonists sounding the same. I didn't want to have to, especially when I write in first person for some reason, but I didn't want my protagonists all to stay the same. And so I was talking to a colleague of mine. Her name is Sonia Odette. She's also a fantasy author. And she said something that you can do is take your previous protagonist from your last book and just do the opposite.
Oh, I love that.
I know, I thought it was so smart. And so for Pell, I did that with two different characters. I took Hulda from the Wimberle House series, who's basically Mary Poppins, and I took Lark from The Hanging City, who's this really sweet, compassionate, kind person. And that's not to say that Pell's the worst, but she's nice in a very different way than Lark is. She's very aggressive in her personality. If you're doing something she doesn't like, she's going to let you know. She's not going to hold her tongue to keep the peace or anything like that. And so she got to form based on the antithesis of two previous female protagonists I had had.
That's so cool. That's so cool. Do you find that people you meet in real life ever inspire your characters?
You know what's so funny is that if I write contemporary, I have two contemporaries, very much so. But there's this weird like line in my head, maybe an Amaranth and Well, where once I go into fantasy land, everything in our world is just shut out. I have never based a character in a fantasy novel on anyone in real life. But when I write contemporary, it's everywhere pulling from real life. It's a weird thing.
It's so fascinating how your mind works, you know?
It's a mess in
Um,
here.
so I'm interested in knowing what made this the right time for you to tell this particular story, especially given how many books you've written. Are there any specific experiences or like challenges from your previous books that really helped you write Still the Sun now?
Yeah, you know what's funny? The whole reason that it came about is my last contract. I sold a bunch of books. It's like a bunch. I sold three, I think. But my editor said, "Oh, but we want a romantasy before these other ones." The romantasy that I did not have. Okay, and I was like, "Oh, okay, I'll do a romantasy." And so I started going through all my notes, trying to find anything that was even slightly interesting to me that so I could write. And I came across that like this one-page thing in my Remarkable about this dream I had. And I was like, oh, I forgot about this. And that's when I started looking at it. And I was like, okay, well, what would the machines do? Same problem I'd always come back to. What would the machines do? And for some reason, then I figured out in a day what the machines did, and it all started coming together. And the world building, the ending, all came together. And so it was just my brain's time, I guess. It was finally time for that story. But another thing is, I have always been afraid of science fiction because I feel like even if you're writing soft science fiction, it kind of has to make some sense. And the last math class I took was when I was 15. That was 21 years ago, you know? And so it's definitely tricky writing a character who is smarter than me, because Pell's smarter than me. And I've done it twice before, so previous works have helped me figure out how to do that. So Alvy from The Plastic Magician and again Hulda from Keeper of Enchanted Rooms are both smarter than me in different ways. And so being able to understand, like, do your best, I stop and research if you have to. I had a mechanical engineer review my stuff for me to make sure it was all sounding smart. I literally would just get a bunch of machinist terms and parts and pieces in just like a glossary and be like, this, and then I just had somebody fix it for me. Because I was
I
like,
love
I
that.
don't know. Pell knows, I don't know. So that was definitely really helpful. Um, but yeah, I think honestly, I don't think this book could have happened even just 5 years ago because doing all those previous books, I think gave me the confidence to do something a little bit more complex because this is definitely one of my more complex novels. That was definitely something that helped me as well.
So cool. And I love how you actually had someone weigh in on the engineering terminology. I'm like you, I am not an engineer. Like anything
Good.
related to mechanical stuff, I'm just like, I'll have someone else deal with that. But from my standpoint, it felt very the language that you used felt really like the way I imagined an engineer's mind would work. Like the terminology felt very, very like
Thank
authentic
you.
from an outsider's perspective. So great job.
Thanks. To help, I had a roommate who was a civil engineer, and just looking at what her classes were called made me cry. And she beta read Hanging City for me, which has civil engineering in it, and then her sister was a mechanical engineer, so I just passed on to her sister. So that was useful.
Your Paper Magician series, by the way, like people in my book club frickin' love it.
Thank
Absolutely
you.
love it. And it has a very unique magic system that's tied
Yes.
to creation. So, was there a specific moment in your life that inspired the type of magic in that series?
Um, like the type of magic in Paper Magician specifically,
Yeah, yeah.
it was, I just came up with it. Honestly, Kate, listen, this all ties back to fifth grade where I learned how to make an origami crane. Like, for, I don't know, I don't remember why. Hey, Miss Chambers, if you're ever watching this, we learned how to make origami cranes in class. And I just thought that was just the bee's knees. I just thought it was so cool. And I've always liked origami. I've tried to get into it more like as a kid and into my teen years, but it's hard, right? So I'm like, oh, I quit. But I think that was a seed. And so I mentioned before we started recording, I used to live up in Moscow, Idaho. And so my husband and I would drive all the way down to Salt Lake for holidays. So it was a long road trip, it was about 12 hours. And I would just like sit there and think about books. And I just one point thought, wouldn't it be cool if a paper bird could just come to life on its own? And actually, the first character I ever thought of for that book was Emery Thane. I just thought that'd be so cool, but I can't have a book that's just about paper cranes. I don't know if that's like the Sanderson and like Brent Weeks books I've read like in my head. I was like, it can't just be about that. So what else is paper? I'm like, well, paper's man-made. And so I'm like, let's do man-made materials. And so that's how it came together.
So unique, so
Thank
genius. I
you.
mean, I imagine with so many fantasy books out there, it would probably be pretty daunting to come up with something original or that something that felt
It
like it hadn't
is.
been like is that I don't know. That's just what it would be like for me, but I don't know if you've experienced that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's so hard to come up with something that makes sense, that's unique. And what's so funny is I'm going to do a plug for myself. I actually have a book coming out in November. It's called Charlie and Holmberg's Book of Magic. It's how to write magic systems.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And
Amazing.
so I have an appendix in there that is commonly used magic. It's like, this is a big list of magic that you will find in every fantasy novel. And I say there's three ways that you can use this. The first way is to pick one if you want a really low learning curve, so you get more readers, who maybe not don't like fantasy so much. Like, pick one of these; it's really easy to follow. The second one is avoid these, so if you want to be unique. And then the third one is take one of these and do something different about it. And this summer, I wrote it, but then I was like, okay, Charlie, take your own advice. What would you do? Take one of these, and how would you do it uniquely? So I thought, okay, healing, super common magic. It has so many tropes and everything. And I was like, okay, how would you do healing uniquely? And then I got an idea for it, and then I wrote a book in 15 days, and now that one's coming out next year.
No way.
It was so fast. It's like a whole story.
Oh
It's
my
so
gosh.
fast, but it's interesting because like coming up with something completely unique, it's almost impossible. Because like, I'm sure you've heard authors say it's like You're just taking the same things and making them new, or taking the same things. Oh, these haven't been paired together before. I'll pair these. Completely unique things. It's hard. And I'm not even the first one to do origami magic. At the time, I thought I was, but I wasn't. Like, I know there's an anime called Read or Die. I think it came out in like 1999 or something, where they have magic with paper. And I think there's one other too, but it's hard. But there's always a new way to reinvent things, a new way to do things, and that's kind of what we have to go for.
I love it. For the book with healing magic, you said you wrote it in 15 days. Is that the
Fastest I've
that
ever written a book.
is it?
Yeah, I was
What's
like obsessed with it.
how many words a day is that? That's bananas.
I actually broke my words in a day. What's so funny is I broke my words in a day, like max words in a day this year, with another book called The Head Witch's Cure for Marriage. So I wrote 11,000 words in a day, and then the next month I broke it again. I wrote 14,700 words in a day.
Charlie, that's unbelievable.
My husband had some really strategically placed camping trips. So I'm just like, I don't know what to do. I'll just go work on this book.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that won't ever happen again, I'm sure. But and then people are like, oh, what's it about? And I'm like, listen, it's the most vanilla fantasy I've ever written. I don't want to talk about it. But I love it. So.
Oh, it's funny because you're like, that won't happen again, and yet somehow you keep like breaking your own record. So
we'll see.
Yeah,
that's unusual. That's an unusual thing to have happen, is to do it that fast. So
I feel like there is just a story inside of you that needed to come out. It's just one of those things.
It was like a violent illness.
Yes. So let's go back to Still of the Sun for a second.
Okay.
So I feel like Still of the Sun has this really, really great balance between a mystery that's unfolding, but also character development, where you're learning more and more about these like characters, and these three characters in particular as the book goes on. So were there any scenes that were particularly tough to write? And were any of those related to Pell and Heartwood's relationship?
You know what? With the relationship, the hard thing to write was, how is Heartwood going to present himself? Because you have these two people, and one does not remember anything, so she's coming into it fresh, and the other one remembers everything, is hurt by everything, and has to act like he's not. He can't say anything about it, And so it's like, okay, so how would he? But he's really bad at hiding it. And so, okay, how would he come into this situation? But he's not a point of view character. And so all of his mixed feelings I have to interpret through Pell's lens. And so that could be a little tricky at parts. As for the tricky scenes, there's definitely trying to pace out like all the little bits of information to go into those really big reveals at the end. Like the whole last act is like reveal, which is like the most fulfilling thing right there. But making sure all of those were planted just right took like massive storyboarding, and making sure it's all going to be how it was, especially with not giving away Mosaic. It's like, how can I make darkness seem innocent? So
Yeah, you did such a great job with Heartwood's character, and I didn't guess at all like what his backstory was, or that he already knew Pell and all of that stuff. But I knew right away that I really liked him, because I love any kind of brooding male.
It's like in fiction, I love like the brooding heroes, but in real life, I really don't.
Yeah, I know. In real life, I'd be like, oh, get over yourself. But in books, it's like my kryptonite. So I knew right away that I really liked Heartwood.
Okay, great.
Okay, so let's discuss your writing process. You mentioned storyboarding for the reveals at the end, but I want to know, are you a meticulous plotter, or does the story unfold as you go?
I am 99% of the time. I am a meticulous plotter. Like, I'll turn my camera. Do you want to see a thing?
Yeah.
So I have storyboards like this all over my house. And so I am a huge, I take a bunch of notes in a notebook, and once a story is forming, then I have to go sticky note it on a wall, and then from that I make an outline, and then from the outline I make a book. So I'm very meticulous in plotting and outlining.
I saw that there were different colors in your storyboard. Is there a color system that you follow?
It depends on the book.
Okay.
So sometimes, if I have multiple point of views, each point of view will be its own color. If I don't, then a lot of times pink is like the romantic subplot, or like blue is like what the villain's doing, so I can make sure that they're always being active or something like that.
So cool. I love it. I just heard about the Save the Cat writes a novel structure, like with the 15-point structure. Is that or the 15 beats? Is that something that you do, or does the flow of the story just come naturally to you?
You know what's funny? As I read the original Save the Cat, the one for screenwriters,
Yeah.
and then I wrote Paper Magician.
Really?
Yeah. And so the way I do it now, it's kind of like Save the Cat, but like really lazy and on drugs. So it's like loosely, I'm like, okay, I know there's gonna be I don't remember what they call it, like the dark before the dawn and the climax, and we're gonna have a break into one and a midpoint, and then I'm like, what's the other stuff? I don't know. Let's just put colors on the wall, you know. So it's like it's loosely kind of still that, but I'm not super meticulous following that structure either.
Yeah. I find it must, and again, I'm making like huge assumptions here, but I imagine that when writing a book, it's you know how you want it to start roughly, you know who the characters are, and you probably know how you want it to end, but that middle part, does it feel like a marathon at times?
In the past, it has. I'm not afraid of my middles anymore because, like, the midpoint, it's kind of like almost like a mini climax, right? And so it's always exciting to build up to the midpoint. And I always think if you don't know what's going to happen, like if you have a saggy middle, like just think of a scene that would be really cool to have, like your standard. Oh no, we fell into an icy river and now we have to cuddle for warmth, and then just stick it in the middle of your storyboard, and then be like, okay, how can I get them here? And then you start figuring it out, and it just fills it all in.
Hmm. Yeah,
So
it almost feels like your approach to storytelling is kind of, at least with the examples you've given, it's almost like you've got this one scene that you want to get because they took you away from me and the machines and the two mysterious figures, and then filling in the cracks around that,
yes,
which is cool.
yeah, exactly, yeah.
Hmm. Really, really awesome. So, Still the Sun explores really deep themes like memory, identity, and connection. What do you hope that readers take away from these themes? Like, was there anything in particular that you were really trying to say?
I mean, a big thing with like memory and connection, I feel like they kind of go together, right? Because if you think of like your fondest memories, a lot of them are connected to other people in your life. You know, I'm going to think about my kids and my husband, and those are my fondest memories. And you know, I'm like thinking of pharaohs in Egypt. For some reason, they're surrounded by all this treasure, but they can't take it with them. It's like when you're at the end of your life and you're on your deathbed, the memories are what you get to take with you. And so there's actually a big theme in this book is that of sacrifice. And what I really wanted to do in this book is make it so anything that somebody sacrificed, they don't get it back. Like
Hmm.
you don't get it back in the end. Like Hartwood doesn't get to have his godly powers restored in the end. Like the other people in M Garden don't get to have their memories back. Like anything that has sacrificed for this story, it is a sacrifice. You don't get it back. Casmia doesn't get restored. Nothing gets to come back because the sacrifice is so important, and we can't expect to make sacrifices and then have it unsacrificed. I'm sure there's a better word for that.
Yeah, but it's not
That
a
was a big thing.
boomerang or anything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but having like your memories stolen from you and realizing like how precious those are, especially because Pell had two timelines taken from her, right? And when she remembers the first one, and it's just like this, oh my gosh, wait, I can't believe I forgot because those are such precious things that were taken from me. When you're on your deathbed at the end of your life, that's what you have is your memories and your connections, right? But with identity, it's despite the fact that Pell has lost two timelines worth of memories, she's still fundamentally the same person. And that's not to say that the deeds and like the things that you do don't affect who you are as a person, because they very much do. But I also think that there's this intrinsic self that we have that no matter what timeline you end up getting put in or the situations you get put in, like that's your fundamental who you are. And you it's like I just saw Inside Out too. Have you seen it
I
yet?
haven't seen it yet. I've seen
So
the first one,
they
of course.
yeah, it's
Sobbed.
it's
Yeah.
good. But they have a helping in that movie about like here's like your core beliefs of who you are, and it's like those don't change unless I mean you take them and throw them out a window, or they put it in a giant vacuum and throw it out the window in that movie. But you know, and so there's that kind of playing around with identity there too.
So to you, is Pell, no matter what, always going to be the person who's solving problems and fixing things and seeing things through to the end. Is that your
Yeah, like
takeaway?
that's yeah, like I mean, there are things that can happen to you and things that you can do that will like divert or mold who you are. Hopefully for the better, but not always. But yeah, that's just like who Pell is. Like she's always like in all her timelines, she has the same personality and she comes
Hmm.
at things the same way.
Yeah. So awesome. So to me, Still the Sun definitely blends science fiction and fantasy,
Yes.
if you agree. and,
On
um,
accident.
and so how did you balance these genres, and was it challenging to have them work together?
You know what's so funny? It wasn't super hard outside of what we already talked about, how Pell's smarter than me. I never intended for it to be as science fictiony as it was. It just kind of happened that way. It's like, oh, well, the machines are going to lend to science fiction. And I'm like, oh, to make this work, they have to be on their own planet. And the planetary stuff gets very science fictiony too. And what's so funny is if I took this book and I dedicated a day to edit, I could probably just make it a straight up science fiction book. But I didn't intend for it to be that way. And so because it was more accidental, it wasn't super hard. But I also like the thing that got me started as a writer was not a book. It was an anime called The Vision of Escaflowne, and it's also kind of a blend of science fiction and fantasy. And so I don't know, maybe there's always a little kernel of that in the back of my head because I loved that story so much.
Oh, that's awesome. My partner's really into anime, and so I've started watching, and we did the whole well, I've seen Death Note twice. I
Oh
freaking
yeah, it's a good
love
one.
Death Note, like master class in writing. But we just started watching Fate Zero, and I don't know if you've seen
I
it, but
haven't seen that one.
it's pretty good. It's pretty
Like it
good. But
sounds like a Gundam Wing, but I don't.
yeah. But it's it's it that to me, that line between science fiction and fantasy is so fascinating because there's definitely a Venn diagram that's kind of connecting the 2, and I don't know, I just feel like this one, I loved the elements of sci-fi in it. I thought it was
Thank
really,
you.
really
I
great.
felt a little bad because like they asked me for a romantasy and I'm like, surprise, it's a sci fantasy. Sorry.
Or like romanticize. That's yeah.
Romanticized
Yeah.
fantasy. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I'm gonna call it that now.
So okay, we before we started recording, you were saying that this question potentially stresses you out, so we'll see how this
I
goes.
wrote down my answers.
Yeah.
I got
So,
it.
okay, who would be your dream cast for the main characters if Still the Sun were adapted into a film or show?
Okay. So I was already like I already told you, but I get asked this all the time, and I am like the least fun person to ask this to because I'm so bad at actors and actresses and remembering their names and what they look like and what they were in. And so I did research so I could answer this. Okay, I had two for Pell. One was Natalie Martinez, and the other one was Paige Sparra. She played Leah on The Good Doctor.
Oh, I'm just googling.
Googling
Oh
them.
yeah. Oh yeah, Paige
So,
Sparrow's like that's exactly what I pictured Pell to look like in
okay,
my
great.
brain. Yeah.
She just needs to get a darker tan.
Yeah.
Mosaics I found because like Mosaics and Heartwood they have to look similar, but like I think just with costuming and makeup like it'll be that because they don't their faces aren't the same. But I had Michael Stol I'm going to say his name right Stolbarg for him. You can look it up.
I'm googling. Oh yeah. This guy. Oh, he was in Boardwalk Empire.
Was he?
Yeah, he was. It was a great show. Yes, he was like amazing. Okay,
You see
great.
what I mean? I'm like I don't know what they're in.
Okay. Wow,
I do
you went
know
so deep with your research with
I
this.
did. I have three for Heartwood, but I know who two of them are.
Okay.
Oh, I didn't know the name of one of them, but when I found him, I'm like, oh, I just watched Twisters. I
Okay.
know who this is. So Glenn Powell, and he was in Twisters. I'm like,
Yeah.
he could probably do Heartwood. There's another one named Brandon Sklenar, who I think could do Heartwood.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah.
then the one that you won't have to look up, Henry Cavill could do Heartwood.
Of course. I think Henry Cavill could do anything.
Henry Cavill can do whatever he wants. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. Brandon Sklenar, if that's how you say his last name, and Glenn Powell look very similar. I'm
They
just
do look
realizing
very
this now.
similar.
Like I think
Mm-hmm.
I would confuse them if the names weren't like
They should
right
be
there.
Mosaic and Heartwood then, because they look
Yeah.
similar. There you go. Do them. Let's cast them.
Perfect. Problem solved. Thank you for your research. Were there any other characters that you wanted to cast, or
Oh
are your
no, that would
casting
take
days
too
done?
long for
That's
me
it.
to
Okay.
figure that one out.
Okay. Okay, so I came across this Reddit Ask Me Anything where you mentioned the importance for aspiring writers to hit a daily word count. So I've got 3 questions for you. 1, do you still believe this? 2, do you stick to this yourself? And 3, what does your daily writing routine look like? And if that's too many questions at once, I could just ask you one at
No,
a
you're
time.
good. I do still believe this. So yes, so the first one. Do I stick to it myself? No, I don't. And I don't because I don't need to. So when I was first starting out, I had to have a daily word count because that's how I would get things done. I think when I was in college, I would do 500 words a day. If I was currently taking classes, and if it was in the summer break, I would do 1,000 words a day. And if I came up short, I would make myself make it up the next day. And I'm a type A personality, so I did. But now I don't really need to do it. It's like that James Clear Atomic Habits thing where if you do something long enough, you don't have to worry about it anymore. I rarely actually look at my word count unless it's like a 14,700 word day.
And you're like, "Wow, that's a
Right.
lot."
Then I'm like, I wonder how many I did. I usually just do it by scenes. Like I'll write a full scene, and then I'll go do something else, and I'll write a full scene, and go do something else. But I do think that getting started, having a daily word count is really, really important because so many people who want to be authors haven't finished a book. And even if it's like a garbage trash book, if it's done, you're so ahead of the curve. And my writing usually I like to write in the morning because that's when I'm smart. I get dumber as the day goes on. So you have like 70% Charlie right now, but I like writing in the morning, almost first thing in the morning. Though during the school year, I have to wait for my kids to go to school, and then I will usually sit down and I'll write if I'm really into a book because all my books have a moment where I just get super into them, and then I'll usually write more than a scene, and then I usually go to the gym and then I'll come back and write more, or I have to come back and do all the author things that aren't writing. Like we have edits, we have social media, we have interviews, stuff like that, and get all that taken care of. But my best writing I get done in the morning, and then when I'm really into a book, I usually have a second wind in the evening.
Amazing. Now, when you think about your trajectory just in skills as an author, what do you think has gotten easier for you over time? Like, if you were to look at your writing from many, many years ago when you were in college to today, like what are you better at just through practice?
Um, Better. I would say conflict, like making sure that there is a conflict that needs to be solved. There's character conflict and there's plot conflict, and making sure because that's what makes plot. You'd be
Mhm.
surprised. You saw my earlier books. You're like, what's happening? What's happening right now?
More atmospheric, I guess.
Right? And I would say like character conflict and stuff like that too. But honestly, like one of my weaknesses with my rough draft, especially, are character arcs. I always forget that a character should probably arc sometime, and I always have to go back and put it in. Or I remember last minute, I'm like, oh, maybe I should add this to my outline. But what's so funny, I was actually just talking to my friend Caitlin about this, is that so often, like even a decade into doing it professionally, it's the really basic things that we have to come back to. Like you just forget just most. I'm like, oh, I forgot to establish setting. The most basic things that we just forget because we always want to be bigger and better and get to all this juicy stuff, and you forget establish your character, establish your setting, have a character arc, stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like there's something so interesting to me about just the structure of writing like a book, just because there's so many things happening and so many elements that need to be considered that I feel like it's just this like gigantic consideration and puzzle that you're solving. And I think I came across this TikTok it might have been actually by Brandon Sanderson, where he was mentioning how ideally at the beginning of every chapter, either you're or from like at one chapter at the beginning to the end of a chapter, the character that it's mainly focusing on either should be like accomplishing something and it's like has a success, or ends up like in a high position and
Failing
then it ends up at
miserably.
a low one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like it would just get so challenging to consider all of that as you're writing.
I remember the first time I ever heard that. in a scene, oh, I just lost my train of thought too. Like in a scene, like it's something similar like that. It's like something has to happen in every scene, which sounds obvious,
Yeah.
right? But I remember when I first heard that, it's like the characters can't be the same place they were at the beginning of the scene that they were at the end of the scene. That sounded so stressful. It's like, wait, I have to get down to that level and figure it out. But like once you get the hang of try fail cycles and stuff like that, you do it naturally. Like because again, I used to watch so much anime as a teenager that a lot of the long anime has filler episodes in it where nothing plot wise happens. And I used to think that my books had to have filler episodes too. And that's a really bad thing to do. Don't do that, guys.
From
So
your anime
it's hard.
training.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it comes naturally after a while. But yeah, it sounds more stressful than I think it is in practice.
And are you imagining the scenes in your head? Like, obviously, you've got your storyboarding thing, but do you kind of like drift off and your fingers just flow? Is that what
Yeah,
happens?
yeah, uh-huh. Me and my husband had many a marriage struggle because he didn't understand why he couldn't come talk to me while I was writing. I would get so mad.
Yeah, it's like a meditative process in a
It
way.
really is. Like you're somewhere else.
Yeah.
Like it's crazy.
Wow. Wow. So, looking back, what were the most fulfilling and most challenging parts of writing Still the Sun?
um it was definitely like those big reveals, right?
Yeah.
Like being able to, like, when you've been working for so long, to finally be like, this was it, you pull the curtain back. And there's a lot of curtain pulling in this too. That was definitely the most fulfilling things about Still the Sun. And like again, I think I mentioned it's like just making sure it would all add up, that all the story math would come to a good conclusion without being obvious. Because what I like, it's fine if a reader can guess, oh, I bet it's this and I bet it's this. But as long as they can't guess these other things, it's fine.
Yeah.
I want something in there to surprise the reader. And so that was definitely the most fulfilling and fun to do.
Yeah, yeah. I often when I post online, I'll share how I'm a real passenger princess reader because I'm just in for the ride and I never guess any of the reveals. I'm always surprised. And so let me tell you, Still the Sun like shocked me beyond belief because already the reveals were so good, even for someone who is very, very observant and perceptive. But for me, I was like blown away.
Thank you. You're
You're welcome.
the best kind of reader.
It's perfect. Yeah, yeah. I'm like your ideal guinea pig. So your stories often feature really strong female protagonists. What draws you to these characters?
Um, because I am one.
Oh.
No. You know what's so funny? When I first started writing, I used to think that if I wanted it to be a likable protagonist, it had to be a man. And so
Hmm.
I'd always be like, no, it has to be a guy, it has to be a guy. And if I had an idea for a woman or a girl, they'd have to be a side character. And I think that's just because a lot of the fantasy I was reading, especially I read a lot of epic fantasy, they're all male characters, And so I had that weird thing in my head for a long time until I was finally like, why? Like, women can do this too, And also, it's like I identify with women. I write a lot of like romantic plot lines, and like I would rather experience that from the woman's point of view than from the man's point of view. And it's just like it's just more fun. And so I eventually just got to this point where I thought I'm just gonna write about women. Like it's okay. I gave myself permission, and it totally is. And I think the last 20 years you've seen a lot more of that, especially in young adult. I wish we could see a little bit more of it in adult too, but yeah, like it's just what I like. It's what I identify with, and so why
Yeah,
not?
especially for first person POV, I feel like it would make things easier, I imagine,
Yeah,
too.
yeah,
Yeah. Um, could you share 3 books that have had a lasting impact on you that you feel like everyone should read in their lifetime?
yes, I can definitely do that. So lasting impact. So there's a lot of books that I just absolutely love, but the ones that come back to mind that I always think about. The first is, and most people won't be surprised to hear this if they've ever met me, is Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones,
Mhm.
which I very rarely read a book twice, and I think I've read House Moving Castle more than any other book. I just love the whimsy of it. I love how it's crafted. It's a comp title for at least half of the books that I've written. I just love it, and I love the Studio Ghibli adaptation of it. That's my favorite movie.
Amazing.
And So the next one I'd probably say is Daughter of the Forest by Juliette Marillier.
Cool.
And that's, I think, the only book that has ever made me ugly cry. Like, red face, like tears streaming, heavy sobs, crying. There was a Wheel of Time book that probably got closed, but and it's so funny. It's like I've read that book I think 1.5 times, but I still think about it. Like the first time I read it would have been 15 years ago, but I still think about it all the time. It had such an impact on me, just the way it was written and the beauty of it and the tone and the slow burn, and it was so good. It was just so good, and I still think about it. And I'd probably say the third one is the Mistborn series. Um, like just the way that Brandon builds worlds and builds magic systems was like so phenomenal and very impactful on me that I wanted to be able to build worlds and magic systems like that too. So that was probably a very impactful one as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I read Mistborn for the first time last year. I've only read the first trilogy.
That's the
Just
best one.
it's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the only time I've ever had the hots for a eunuch. So, oh my gosh. I remember reading the big ending in the third book, right?
Yeah.
And I was at the Brigham BYU, what's it called, Harold B. Lee Library in not the cafeteria, the lunchroom, and all these other employees were there. It was a really crowded room, and I'm on the couch reading, and I'm like kind of freaking out. I'm like, oh my gosh, it was him all along.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I
Yeah.
can't say anything, I can't scream. I'm just like,
No, it was nuts. It was absolutely nuts, and it made the main ending made so much sense, but I mean, I would like to think that people who even aren't passenger princesses like myself, like, were really shocked by it. It was really yeah,
yeah,
amazing. And same with the big thing that happened. I don't wanna do any spoilers, but the big surprise that happens in book 1 as well. Yeah, that was also very, very
yeah.
shocking.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so audiobooks have become an increasingly popular way for readers to experience stories. And I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but Audible actually gifted copies of your book to some members of my book club in a little sweepstakes giveaway,
Thanks,
which was really,
Audible.
really cool. Thank you, Audible. So how do you feel about your work being adapted into audiobooks? Like, what's that experience like?
I love it. I have always loved it because I feel like an audiobook is half of a movie.
Yeah.
Like I get half of a movie, like especially when you have a really good narrator and you get to hear their voices. It's like, oh my gosh, they're real. It's such a cool feeling. I don't listen to a ton of fiction on audiobook, but I always want to listen to at least a snippet of like my own books because it's it's half a movie. Like they feel so much more real.
Yeah. What does it feel like to hear your words be read by another person?
Kind of crazy.
Yeah.
It's like, and sometimes they say something like that was good, like, oh my god, that sounds like so stuck up. But every now and then you
No.
get like, I don't remember writing that, but I'll take it.
I love it. I love it. And so with your writing, what's the most meaningful compliment you've ever received?
Oh, meaningful compliments. Um, like on a lighter level, whenever somebody says they lost sleep reading my book, like I feel like I won something. I've had two actually. One was way back, closer to the beginning, and one was super recent. And I had one where somebody said that they had been battling depression for a really, really long time, and they had read Followed by Frost and super identified with the main character of that, and it helped bring them out of that. And like they sent me this beautiful like long email about it, and they've ordered multiple copies of that book, and this is like this really kind things about how much that helped her, and that was so meaningful to me because it's like, oh, I'm like, and you always think like, oh, I'm just writing these for fun. This is such a cool job. And then when you find out that like your words and your thoughts had that much of an effect on someone else, it's really awesome. And then recently, I actually had a father reach out to me and tell me that he really loved my Paper Magician series and that his daughter had recently had her leg amputated. And so, Plastic Magician, there's a character in there who lost an arm. And Plastic Magician is about finding a prosthetic, basically, with like a mix of science and magic to replace it. And that hit really close to home that he was going to read it to his daughter and everything, and that
Oh,
made me feel really, really good too.
That's so sweet.
I know.
It's like
I'm
that's very emotional. I
Thank
like have
you.
chills. Oh, if you could write a spin-off book about one of the side characters in Still the Sun, who would it be and potentially what would they be doing?
I mean, if I wrote a spin-off book, if I could write a prequel, it would
Mhm.
be Casnia, right? Casternia.
Yeah.
Um, just because there's so much there to dive into. Especially like you could see what Heartwood was like before, and like why the war started, and how she got involved with the ancients and all that stuff. And so she would be the most interesting one to explore, I think. But so it's all passed up though, because I'm like, I think Antisa would be really interesting too, because like, well, if this is something even I don't know, right? Like, why did Antisa have the key?
Mhm.
Like, why was it given to her? And so that would be something that would be really fun to explore. But again, she's dead, so that would have to be a
Yeah.
prequel. So
Cool. Cool. I would love that prequel, by the way,
thank you.
about the key. I think that would, just in case you need more book ideas, which it seems like you
Yeah.
have no shortage of. So, um, awesome. So, just wrapping things up, what is next for you? And I know you mentioned you've got two books coming out, but do you want to give any more detail about that and anything else?
Oh yeah. So things just got shook. My schedule's being changed, and I don't totally know what it is happening yet. But I do have the Charlene Holmberg's Book of Magic coming out in November, and then next March 4th, I have the fourth book in my Wormborough House series, which is called Wizard of Most Wicked Ways. That's coming out, and then after that will be The Shattered King, and that's the book I wrote in 15 days
Oh my gosh.
with the common magic system. And so I'm starting edits on that tomorrow, and I'm super excited to start edits on it because I just love that book.
That's so
But
cool.
yeah, and then after that, that will be a duology, and after that will be the Hedge Witch's Cure for Marriage, and that's a super early Victorian dual. It's gonna be a duology too. With oh my god, if you watch, can I just tell you, I just love the male love interest in it so hard. Do you watch Studio Ghibli at all?
No, I don't. But
Okay, well,
but
if
some
any of
people in
you
the group
do,
might. That's
it's
okay.
like he looks like Fujimoto. He looks like Ponyo's dad, who is like not
Cool.
hot, but that's what makes him so great. Anyway, I'm really excited for that one. That will be a really like Shattered King's a little bit of a darker high fantasy, and the Hedge Witch's Cure for Marriage is a more like whimsical historical. So they'll be fun to do.
Oh my gosh. How do you not run out of ideas? I'm
I have
astonished.
no other hobbies.
Okay. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Charlie. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today. Again, Still the Sun was so amazing. And
Thank you so
thank
much.
you very much, Amazon and Audible, for putting this together.